124 light years from where you are sitting right now, there is a planet that should not be able to support life. It is too big. It is too strange. Its atmosphere is thick with hydrogen. Its surface, if it even has one, is buried under an ocean that could be hundreds of kilometers deep, and it orbits a dim red dwarf star that bathes it in radiation. Earth never has to deal with. By every textbook, definition of habitability, this world fails the test. And yet the most powerful telescope humanity has ever built just found a chemical signal coming from its atmosphere that, on Earth, is only ever made by one thing: life. The planet is called K2-18b, and if you have not heard its name yet, you are about to hear it a lot. It sits in the constellation Leo, orbiting a small, cool star far dimmer than our Sun. It is roughly 8.5 times the mass of Earth, and more than double our planet's size, which places it in a strange category astronomers call a sub-Neptune. That means it is too big to be called a rocky planet like Earth or Mars, but too small to be a gas giant like Neptune or Uranus. For years, scientists were not even sure what a planet like this would look like up close. Then the James Webb Space Telescope turned its mirrors toward it, and everything changed. Before we go further, if strange worlds like this fascinate you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this channel digs into exactly these kinds of discoveries every single week. Let's talk about why K2-18b should be a dead world. First, its size and mass put it in a gray zone where planets often turn out to be miniature versions of Neptune, complete with a crushing hydrogen and helium atmosphere that would flatten anything trying to survive under the pressure. Second, its star is an M-dwarf, a type of star notorious for violent flares that blast out radiation capable of stripping atmospheres away entirely. Third, the sheer size of the planet means gravity there could be several times stronger than what we experience on Earth, another factor that seems hostile to the kind of delicate chemistry life needs to get started. Put simply, if you handed this planet's profile to an astrobiologist 5 years ago, most would have crossed it off the habitable list without a second thought. But K2-18b refused to follow the script. In 2019 and then again in 2023, earlier observations found something unexpected. The planet's atmosphere contained methane and carbon dioxide, but almost no ammonia. That combination is important because it matches a theoretical model scientists had proposed years earlier for a class of worlds called Hycean planets. The word Hycean is a blend of hydrogen and ocean. It describes a planet with a thick, hydrogen-rich atmosphere sitting on top of a warm, deep, possibly life-friendly ocean. Suddenly, a planet that looked hostile on paper looked like it might actually have the two ingredients scientists care about most: liquid water and a stable atmosphere. Then came the discovery that made headlines around the world. A team led by researchers at the University of Cambridge used JWST's mid-infrared instrument to look at K2-18b's atmosphere in a completely different wavelength range than before. What they found was a chemical signature consistent with a molecule called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, and possibly its close chemical cousin, dimethyl disulfide, or DMDS. Here's why that detail matters so much. On Earth, DMS is not some exotic industrial chemical. It is produced almost exclusively by living organisms, mostly marine phytoplankton drifting near the ocean's surface. It is, essentially, the smell of the sea, the chemical that gives coastlines that distinct briny scent. And on Earth, nothing except life makes it in meaningful quantities. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange. The concentration of these gases in K2-18b's atmosphere was not small. It was not a faint whisper of a signal buried in noise. According to the research team, the levels detected were thousands of times higher than what you would find in Earth's atmosphere, potentially reaching over 10 parts per million compared to less than 1 part per billion here at home. If life is responsible, it would mean an entire alien biosphere pumping out these gases on a scale almost impossible to imagine. One of the study's co-authors put it directly. Either scientists are looking at a completely new kind of chemistry never seen before anywhere in the universe, or they are looking at the first real evidence of biological activity on a planet outside our solar system. Let that sink in for a moment. Not a hint. Not a maybe. A scientist working directly on this data described it as potentially the first sign of alien life ever detected using humanity's most advanced telescope on a planet we can only see as a tiny dip in starlight from over 100 light years away. Before you get too excited, and trust me, the scientific community wants you to feel that excitement responsibly, we need to talk about how confident we actually are in this result. In science, especially when a claim is this extraordinary, researchers rely on something called statistical significance, measured in sigma. A 1 sigma result is basically meaningless, easily explained by random chance. A 3 sigma result, which is roughly what the K2-18b detection reached, means there's only about a 0.3% chance the signal appeared purely by random noise. That sounds impressive, and it is a meaningful step forward, but it is nowhere. Near the gold standard scientists require before declaring an actual discovery, that gold standard is 5 sigma, a level of certainty so strict it corresponds to less than a 0.00006% chance of being a fluke. At 3 sigma, you are in interesting territory. At 5 sigma, you are in textbook territory. This is exactly why the response from the wider scientific community has been a careful mix of genuine excitement and disciplined caution. Almost immediately after the announcement, other researchers began independently reanalyzing the exact same dataset, because that is how good science works. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary scrutiny, and nobody wants to be the group that cried wolf on the biggest discovery in human history, only to have it collapse under closer examination. 1. Astrophysicist from Oxford ran a rapid independent check on the data and found that when using different, less optimistic statistical models, the strength of the signal dropped substantially. Other scientists pointed out that the specific atmospheric model used by the original team assumed a particular set of conditions that, if adjusted even slightly, could weaken the entire case. This is not the researchers being wrong. This is science functioning exactly the way it is supposed to. A team behind the original announcement pushed back, arguing their model was more realistic and that using an overly simplified model, like the one used in the quick reanalysis, would naturally produce a lower significance because it fails to capture the real complexity of the planet's atmosphere. Meanwhile, other astronomers in the field acknowledged that the entire episode reflects a broader frustration inside the exoplanet science community, a tension between the excitement of a possible historic discovery and the responsibility to not overstate results that are still technically uncertain. So what could actually be producing these gases if it is not biology? This is the part most headlines skip over, and it is genuinely fascinating. Scientists have not ruled out abiotic, meaning non-living, chemical processes that could theoretically generate dimethyl sulfide under the right planetary conditions. Certain types of volcanic activity, unusual atmospheric photochemistry driven by intense stellar radiation or chemical reactions happening deep within a hydrogen-rich atmosphere could, in theory, produce similar molecules without any life being involved at all. The problem researchers keep running into is scale. Producing this much DMS through purely chemical means, without any biological process behind it, would require conditions we have never directly observed or fully modeled before. That does not prove life exists there. It simply means that if it is not life, it is something we do not yet understand, which in its own way is almost just as remarkable. There is also the matter of what a Hycean world would actually be like if you could stand on it, or rather float above its surface, since it may not have a true solid surface at all. Picture an ocean stretching farther than you can comprehend, warmer than most oceans on Earth, sealed beneath a thick, hazy hydrogen atmosphere that would appear as a dim, reddish twilight even at midday, because the planet's star is so much fainter and redder than our sun. There would be no blue sky, no white clouds drifting overhead. Just a heavy, dense atmosphere pressing down on a dark, endless sea, potentially warm enough and chemically rich enough to support the kind of microbial life that first appeared in Earth's own oceans billions of years ago. It's a genuinely eerie image, and it's exactly the kind of world scientists spent decades assuming could not exist in any life-friendly form because it breaks nearly every rule we built our search for alien life around. For most of the history of the search for extraterrestrial life, scientists focused almost entirely on Earth-like rocky planets orbiting sun-like stars, because that is the only example of a habitable world we have ever confirmed. K2, 18b forces a rethink of that entire strategy. If a world this different, this hostile looking on paper, might actually be capable of supporting life, then the number of potentially habitable planets in our galaxy could be far higher than anyone previously estimated, because Hycean worlds may turn out to be common, while true Earth twins might actually be rare. This is where JWST's engineering becomes just as important to the story as the discovery itself. The telescope does not take a photograph of these planets. It cannot see a glowing blue marble sitting in space the way you might imagine. Instead, it watches K2 and 18b pass directly in front of its host star from our point of view, an event called a transit. As starlight filters through the thin edge of the planet's atmosphere during that transit, different gases absorb different, very specific wavelengths of light. By carefully measuring which wavelengths get slightly dimmer, scientists can reconstruct exactly what molecules are present in an atmosphere over 100 light years away without ever physically touching the planet or sending a single probe anywhere near it. That is the kind of achievement that would have sounded like pure science fiction only 20 years ago. And it is happening as a routine part of JWST's mission today. So what happens next? The researchers behind this discovery are not sitting back and celebrating. They are pushing for more observation time, because the fastest way to move from a 3 sigma hint to a 5 sigma discovery is simply gathering more data. Every additional transit JWST observes adds more signal, more confidence, and either strengthens or weakens the case. Some estimates suggest that somewhere between 16 and 24 additional hours of dedicated observation time could be enough to finally settle the question one way or another. In the world of space science, that is an incredibly short wait for what could be the single most important scientific finding in human history. Dismiss as pure coincidence. Meanwhile, other planets are entering this same conversation, adding useful context to just how rare and strange the K2-18b signal really is. The TRAPPIST-1 system, home to 7 roughly Earth-sized rocky planets orbiting a small red dwarf star, has become one of JWST's other primary targets in the search for habitability. Early results from planets in that system's habitable zone have shown hints of thin atmospheres containing carbon dioxide and trace water vapor, but nothing resembling the dramatic sulfur-based signal seen at K2-18b. That contrast actually strengthens the overall picture. If atmospheric detections like this were common or easy to produce by chance, we would expect to see similar strong biosignature-like signals scattered across many of the planets JWST has studied. Instead, K2-18b stands out as a genuine outlier, which is exactly what you would expect if something unusual, whether biological or an unknown chemical process, is happening specifically on that one world. It is also important to be honest about what discovering microbial life on a planet like K2-18b would and would not mean. This would not be intelligent life. It would not be a civilization, a signal, or anything resembling the aliens of science fiction. At best, based on everything we currently understand, it would represent something more like simple microbial life, similar to the earliest bacteria and phytoplankton that dominated Earth's oceans for billions of years before anything more complex evolved. But even that comparatively modest outcome would be arguably the single most important scientific discovery in human history, because it would answer, for the first time with actual evidence, whether life is a common outcome of chemistry and physics anywhere the right conditions exist, or whether Earth truly is some kind of cosmic fluke. Scientists involved in this research have been remarkably honest about the uncertainty, and that honesty is worth appreciating rather than dismissing as disappointing. One of the lead researchers said something that stuck with a lot of people in the field, essentially arguing that deep skepticism toward your own results is exactly how real science has to work, because it is only through relentless testing, retesting, and independent verification that a claim like this can ever earn the right to be called a discovery. That is not weakness. That is exactly the kind of caution that separates a genuine breakthrough from a headline that fades away in a week. For now, K2-18b remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries in modern astronomy. A planet that, by almost every conventional measure, should be barren, radiation blasted, and utterly hostile to biology, yet is emitting a chemical signal that, on our own planet, has exactly one known source: life. Whether that signal eventually gets confirmed, gets explained away by some undiscovered chemistry, or simply sits in scientific limbo for years while telescopes gather more data, one thing is already certain. This is one of the closest humanity has ever come to detecting. The fingerprint of life beyond Earth, and every new observation JWST captures, is another step toward finally answering the oldest question our species has ever asked. If this kind of deep space mystery blew your mind, do not forget to like this video and subscribe, because there is a lot more where this came from, and you will not want to miss what JWST finds next. And that is really the heart of why this story matters so much, beyond the headlines and the chemical jargon. For thousands of years, humans have looked up at the night sky and asked the same haunting question: are we alone? For almost all of that time, the honest answer had to be, we simply do not know, and we have no real way of finding out. That is no longer true. Right now, in 2026, a piece of human-built technology is sitting nearly 1 million miles from Earth, staring at the faint light of a star more than 100 light-years away, and picking apart the chemical fingerprints of a planet's atmosphere with enough precision to potentially detect the presence of alien biology. Even if K2-18b turns out to have a strange, undiscovered chemical process instead of actual life, the fact that we are even capable of asking this question with real data, real evidence, and real statistical rigor is one of the most extraordinary achievements in the history of science. To really understand how big a leap this is, it helps to rewind the clock a bit. The very first confirmed planet orbiting a normal star outside our solar system was only discovered in 1995. Before that, humanity had exactly one solar system to study, our own, and every idea about how planets form and where life might exist was built on a sample size of one. Since then, astronomers have confirmed thousands of exoplanets, ranging from scorching worlds that orbit their star in mere hours, to icy bodies drifting at the frozen edges of their systems. But almost all of that early work could only tell us a planet's size, its mass, and roughly how far it sits from its star. It could not tell us what that planet was actually made of, or whether its atmosphere held any of the chemical building blocks associated with life. JWST changed that equation entirely, and K2-18b is quickly becoming the poster child for what this new era of atmospheric science can actually accomplish. It is also worth pausing on just how difficult this kind of measurement really is. K2-18b is not just far away, it is small compared to its star. The amount of starlight filtered through its thin atmospheric edge during a transit is an incredibly tiny fraction of the total light JWST receives. Scientists are essentially trying to detect a whisper of chemical information hidden inside an ocean of starlight, using a telescope orbiting nearly 1 million miles from Earth at a gravitationally stable point called the second Lagrange point. Every source of noise, every tiny imperfection in the telescope's instruments, every assumption baked into the atmospheric models used to interpret the data can shift the final result. That is precisely why different research teams using different models and different statistical approaches can look at the exact same raw data set and arrive at meaningfully different conclusions about how confident we should be. This tension is not unique to K2-18b either. It echoes a pattern JWST has run into with other sub-Neptune and rocky exoplanets it has studied over the past few years. In several cases, initial detections of methane, water vapor, or carbon dioxide in a distant atmosphere have later been challenged, refined, or reinterpreted as more data came in and more scientists weighed in with competing models. Some researchers have pointed to a planet called TOI 270d as a cautionary tale, where the identification of both methane and water vapor still led to genuinely conflicting interpretations about what kind of planet it actually is. The lesson from all of this is not that JWST's data is unreliable. It is that squeezing precise chemical answers out of light collected from a planet more than 100 light years away is one of the hardest measurement problems in modern science, and the margin for interpretation is still uncomfortably wide. There's another layer to this story that rarely makes it into the headlines, and it has to do with what scientists call the search for a true silver bullet biosignature. For a long time, the dream was to find one single gas that, if detected in an exoplanet atmosphere, would essentially prove life beyond any reasonable doubt. Oxygen was often cited as the leading candidate, because on Earth, oxygen exists in our atmosphere almost entirely because plants and photosynthetic microbes constantly replenish it. Without life, Earth's oxygen would slowly disappear as it reacted away with rocks and other chemicals. But researchers have increasingly realized that a distant alien biosphere might not produce oxygen at all. On a hydrogen-rich world like K2-18b, life, if it exists, would likely evolve completely different metabolic pathways suited to that environment, which is exactly why dimethyl sulfide became such an interesting target in the first place. It was proposed years earlier in theoretical papers as one of the more promising biosignature candidates specifically for hydrogen-dominated Hycean worlds, long before JWST ever had the chance to actually look for it. That detail matters more than it might seem. This was not a lucky, random discovery. Scientists predicted, based on theoretical models of Hycean planets, that if life existed on a world like this, dimethyl sulfide was one of the molecules most likely to show up in detectable quantities. When JWST's data actually produced a signal matching that exact prediction, it added a layer of credibility that a random, unexpected chemical anomaly would not have carried. Predicting a specific outcome in advance and then observing it is a far stronger form of evidence than simply stumbling across something strange and trying to explain it afterward. That does not make the detection certain. It does make it considerably harder to dismiss as pure coincidence. Meanwhile, other planets are entering this same conversation, adding useful context to just how rare and strange the K2-18b signal really is. The TRAPPIST-1 system, home to 7 roughly Earth-sized rocky planets orbiting a small red dwarf star, has become one of JWST's other primary targets in the search for habitability. Early results from planets in that system's habitable zone have shown hints of thin atmospheres containing carbon dioxide and trace water vapor, but nothing resembling the dramatic sulfur-based signal seen at K2-18b. That contrast actually strengthens the overall picture. If atmospheric detections like this were common or easy to produce by chance, we would expect to see similar strong biosignature-like signals scattered across many of the planets JWST has studied. Instead, K2-18b stands out as a genuine outlier, which is exactly what you would expect if something unusual, whether biological or an unknown chemical process, is happening specifically on that one world. It is also important to be honest about what discovering microbial life on a planet like K2-18b would and would not mean. This would not be intelligent life. It would not be a civilization, a signal, or anything resembling the aliens of science fiction. At best, based on everything we currently understand, it would represent something more like simple microbial life, similar to the earliest bacteria and phytoplankton that dominated Earth's oceans for billions of years before anything more complex evolved. But even that comparatively modest outcome would be arguably the single most important scientific discovery in human history, because it would answer, for the first time with actual evidence, whether life is a common outcome of chemistry and physics anywhere the right conditions exist, or whether Earth truly is some kind of cosmic fluke. Scientists involved in this research have been remarkably honest about the uncertainty, and that honesty is worth appreciating rather than dismissing as disappointing. One of the lead researchers said something that stuck with a lot of people in the field, essentially arguing, retesting, an independent verification that a claim like this can never earn the right to be called a discovery. That is not weakness. That is exactly the kind of caution that separates a genuine breakthrough from a headline that fades away in a week. For now, K2-18b remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries in modern astronomy. A planet that, by almost every conventional measure, should be barren, radiation blasted, and utterly hostile to biology, yet is emitting a chemical signal that, on our own planet, has exactly one known source: life. Whether that signal eventually gets confirmed, gets explained away by some undiscovered chemistry, or simply sits in scientific limbo for years while telescopes gather more data, one thing is already certain. This is one of the closest humanity has ever come to detecting the fingerprint of life beyond Earth. And every new observation JWST captures is another step toward finally answering the oldest question our species has ever asked. If this kind of deep space mystery blew your mind, do not forget to like this video and subscribe, because there is a lot more where this came from, and you will not want to miss what JWST finds next.